California sunlight poured through the wide glass windows of the Laguna Beach home, bright and warm against polished oak floors. The afternoon had been calm. Toys scattered across the living room. A half-finished cup of tea rested on the coffee table. 3-year-old Elias ran too fast. His socks slid against the wood. His small body tipped forward. The sound of his fall was soft, but sharp enough to pull every adult eye toward him. He didn't look at his father first. He didn't look at his mother. Elias reached forward, arms open, face trembling. "Mom," the word left him clearly, not confused, not mumbled. He stretched toward Naomi. Naomi was already kneeling, instinct moving faster than thought. Her hands hovered before touching him, uncertain for half a second. Across the room, Clara stopped breathing. Matthias stood motionless near the hallway entrance. His German accent had softened over years in California, but in that instant he felt foreign in his own home. The air shifted. Clara's fingers tightened around the back of a dining chair. Her face did not break. No tears, no raised voice, just stillness. Naomi gathered Elias carefully, holding him close, while his crying softened into quiet hiccups. Matthias felt something settle heavily in his chest. Not anger, not confusion, recognition. Something had already changed long before this moment. Now it had been spoken aloud. Clara did not move immediately. Naomi's arms wrapped around Elias, fully now. She pressed her cheek lightly against his curls, whispering comfort in a low, steady tone. Elias clung to her shirt, fingers gripping fabric, as if afraid she might disappear. The crying eased. That was the second wound. Clara crossed the living room, slowly, every step measured. Her heels made a soft sound against the wood. She stopped a few feet away, close enough to see the faint red mark forming on Elias's knee. "I'm right here," she said. Her voice was even, calm, controlled. Elias looked up. His eyes moved past her shoulder and returned to Naomi's face. He buried himself again into Naomi's neck. Clara's lips parted slightly, as if she had more to say. The words did not arrive. Matthias cleared his throat, though there was nothing in it. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, unsure where to place himself. His wife stood near their son. The woman they employed held him. The room felt smaller. Clara adjusted the sleeve of her blouse. A reflex. She became aware of everything at once. The open patio door, the sunlight, the toys on the rug. The fact that this was happening in their home. Not behind closed doors, but in the center of it. "I can take him," she said gently. Naomi hesitated. Just a second. That hesitation landed harder than the word had. Elias shook his head and tightened his hold. Clara stepped back. Not dramatically, not with anger, just a small retreat. Barely visible, but everyone saw it. Matthias moved at last. He stepped closer, though not close enough to touch anyone. His tall frame cast a long line across the rug, dividing the room without intention. His jaw tightened, then relaxed. He told himself this was a child's reflex. A moment, nothing more. But he knew better. He had watched it happen in smaller ways for months. Elias reaching for Naomi at bedtime. Elias calling for her when he woke from naps. Elias searching for her face, first during new experiences. He had noticed. He had nothing. Clara bent slightly, lowering herself to eye level with her son. "It's okay," she said softly. "Mommy's here." The word felt heavier now. Elias sniffled. He looked between them, confusion flickering across his small face. Naomi shifted him carefully, as if offering space without fully releasing him. Matthias felt a pull inside him. Loyalty, guilt, responsibility, all pressing at once. He could defend Clara. He could dismiss the moment. He could ask Naomi to step back. Instead, he stood still, because the truth was visible in plain sight. Presence leaves marks. Absence does too. Clara rose again, smoothing her skirt. "Let's clean your knee," she said. Elias did not respond. Naomi whispered, "You're okay, baby," before she could stop herself. The endearment lingered in the air. Matthias closed his eyes for half a breath. He had built companies from nothing, negotiated contracts across continents, managed risks with precision, but he had never calculated this. A single word had exposed a quiet imbalance in his own home. Silence settled over the room in layers. Naomi slowly lowered Elias to his feet, guiding him to stand on his own. His small hand remained wrapped around her finger. Clara noticed that detail. It felt more intimate than the word itself. "Elias," Clara said gently, kneeling again, despite the stiffness building in her posture. "Look at me." He did. His eyes were still wet, but curious now. "Who am I?" she asked, smiling in a way that required effort. Elias hesitated, not because he did not know, because he was thinking. Matthias felt his pulse in his throat. Naomi's hand loosened. She stepped back, half a step, careful not to influence him. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared it might show on her face. Clara waited. "Mommy," Elias said, finally. Relief flickered across Clara's expression. Quick, almost invisible. But the room did not return to normal, because Elias turned again. He reached for Naomi once more, instinct guiding him without thought. Clara rose slowly. The brief reassurance did not erase what had happened first. Matthias walked toward the window, staring out at the California coastline beyond their glass walls. The ocean looked steady, predictable. Inside, nothing felt steady at all. Naomi clasped her hands together in front of her. She wanted to apologize for loving the child, for being present, for not knowing where place ended. Clara adjusted her wedding ring unconsciously. Small movement, a silent question forming behind her eyes. How long had this been building? How had she missed it? The word "mom" had not been a mistake. It had been a reflection. Clara did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She walked toward the hallway with quiet control, each step steady, shoulders straight. The sound of her heels faded as she disappeared past the staircase. Matthias turned immediately. "Clara!" he called. But she did not stop. A bedroom door closed upstairs. Not slammed, closed. The restraint unsettled him more than anger would have. Elias, now distracted by a toy truck near the sofa, seemed unaware of the shift he had caused. Children do not measure impact. They respond to comfort. Naomi stood in the center of the living room, unsure whether to follow Clara or remain with Elias. Her chest felt tight. She replayed the moment in her mind. The fall, the reach, the word. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, though no one had accused her. Matthias faced her, his blue eyes, sharp and analytical in boardrooms, carried something heavier now. "Conflict. You did nothing wrong," he said. His accent thickened slightly under stress. He was hurt, but was not the whole truth. Naomi lowered her gaze. "He spends most of his day with me." There it was, the part no one had spoken aloud until now. Matthias looked toward the staircase. He thought about late flights, missed dinners, Clara's early returns to work, meetings that always seemed urgent, decisions that always seemed necessary. Elias laughed suddenly at his toy, the sound bright and innocent. Upstairs, silence remained. Matthias made a choice without announcing it. He walked toward the stairs, leaving Naomi and the child in the living room. At the base of the staircase, he paused. The house felt different. A single word had drawn a line through the center of their family. None of them could pretend they had not seen it. Cut to 6 years earlier. The house had not always been quiet. 6 years earlier, the Laguna Beach property still smelled of fresh paint and unopened moving boxes. The ocean view had convinced them to buy it before Elias was born. Clara had stood on the balcony then, one hand over her stomach, telling Matthias this would be their beginning. But beginnings rarely follow blueprints. By the time Elias arrived, the air inside the house felt tight. Not loud, not dramatic, just stretched thin. Clara moved through the kitchen with slow, careful steps, her body still healing. A bottle warmed on the counter. The clock read 2:17 a.m. Elias's crying filled the space with sharp urgency, echoing off white walls. Matthias stood near the doorway, in sweatpants and a wrinkled t-shirt, hair uncombed, eyes heavy. He checked his phone without thinking, then slipped it back into his pocket as guilt rose. "I've got him," Clara said, though her voice lacked certainty. She lifted the baby, rocking him against her chest. Elias arched backward, face red, fists clenched. The crying grew louder. Matthias stepped forward. "Maybe he's still hungry. I just fed him." The response was quick, not harsh, just tired. Their marriage had once been effortless. Long dinners in San Francisco, flights between Munich and Los Angeles. Ambition had bonded them. They respected each other's drive. Now respect remained, but patience wore thin. Elias cried on. Matthias reached out to help, then stopped, unsure where to place his hands. He kissed Clara's temple instead. "We'll figure this out," he said softly. She nodded without meeting his eyes. Outside, the California night was still. Inside, the strain had already begun. The crying did not ease with sunrise. By late morning, Clara sat on the edge of the nursery chair, hair tied back loosely, eyes swollen from lack of sleep. Elias lay against her shoulder, restless, even in exhaustion. Every few minutes, he startled awake and began again. The nursery, designed with care months earlier, now felt like a battlefield. Plush animals lined the shelves untouched. A soft blue blanket draped over the crib. White noise machine hummed steadily. None of it made a difference. Matthias stood near the window, jacket already on. His company had expanded rapidly across Europe, and his team depended on him. Conference calls could not be delayed indefinitely. Investors did not wait for sleep schedules to improve. "I'll reschedule what I can," he said, glancing at his watch before catching himself. Clara noticed the glance. She said nothing. She had planned to take only 3 months away from her firm in downtown Los Angeles. That had been the agreement. Structured, sensible. Now even standing felt difficult some days. Her confidence, once sharp and steady in courtrooms, felt fragile here. Elias cried again, a high, piercing sound that tightened every muscle in her body. She tried rocking him differently. She tried humming. She tried walking the length of the hallway. Nothing settled him. Matthias stepped forward and took Elias gently. "Let me," he cradled the baby awkwardly, his tall frame bending over the small bundle. He whispered in German, the language of his childhood, hoping familiarity might soothe him. Elias cried harder. Clara closed her eyes briefly. The sound felt personal now, like failure made audible. Matthias handed him back after a few minutes, frustration masked beneath composure. "Maybe we need help," he said quietly. Clara did not respond immediately. The idea of needing assistance in her own home cut deeper than she expected. But Elias's crying continued, and the silence between them stretched wider than the room. The suggestion lingered through the week. Clara resisted at first. She told herself this phase would pass. Newborns cried. Mothers adapted. She read articles at 3 a.m., searched parenting forums, ordered new bottles overnight. Still, Elias rarely slept more than 40 minutes at a time. The living room became an extension of the nursery. Burp cloths lay folded on the sofa. A half-written email to her law firm remained open on her laptop, cursor blinking patiently. Matthias began working later into the evenings, pacing the patio with his phone pressed to his ear. He spoke in calm, efficient tones, about quarterly projections and overseas partnerships. When he stepped back inside, his voice softened automatically. "How is he?" Clara would shrug. The question felt too large for a simple answer. One afternoon, after Elias cried for nearly 2 hours straight, Clara sat on the floor beside the crib. She did not cry. She did not shout. She simply stared at the pale blue wall, her hands resting loosely in her lap while the sound continued. Matthias knelt beside her. "This isn't about weakness," he said carefully. "It's about support." She turned toward him slowly. "You think I can't handle my own child?" "That's not what I said. But it's what you mean." He exhaled, searching for the right words. In business, clarity came easily. At home, everything required caution. "I mean, we are both exhausted," he said. "And exhaustion doesn't build strength." The truth of that landed quietly. Later that evening, after Elias finally slept, Matthias placed a printed resume on the dining table. Professional nanny, experienced, strong references, background in early childhood care. Clara looked at the paper for a long time. Accepting help felt like surrender, but ignoring reality felt worse. The baby monitor crackled. Elias stirred again. Clara reached for the resume and slid it closer. "Schedule the interview," she said. The interview was set for Thursday afternoon. Clara dressed carefully, even though she had barely left the house in weeks. A structured blouse, light makeup. The effort felt like reclaiming a part of herself. Matthias adjusted his cufflinks in the hallway mirror. He had cleared his schedule for 1 hour. He treated the meeting with the same seriousness he would give a senior hire. At precisely 2 p.m., the doorbell rang. Naomi Johnson stood on the porch, posture straight, expression calm. She wore a simple navy dress and carried a leather folder tucked neatly under her arm. Her voice was warm but measured when she introduced herself. Inside, Elias began crying again. Clara noticed Naomi's eyes shift instinctively toward the sound. Not with impatience, with focus. They sat at the dining table. The resume lay between them. Certifications, childcare training, strong recommendations from previous families in Southern California. Matthias asked structured questions about routine, discipline, sleep cycles. Naomi answered clearly, without exaggeration. Clara watched closely. She studied tone more than words. Elias's crying grew sharper from the nursery. Clara rose quickly. "Excuse me," she returned. Minutes later, Elias in her arms, face flushed and distressed. He would not settle. Naomi remained seated, hands folded loosely. She did not interrupt. She did not offer advice. The crying continued. Matthias and Clara exchanged a glance heavy with fatigue. Finally, Naomi spoke gently. "May I?" Clara hesitated. The moment stretched thin. Then she nodded. Naomi stood and approached slowly, allowing Elias to see her before reaching out. Her movements were steady, unhurried. She took him carefully, supporting his head with practiced ease. Elias cried for another few seconds. Then his body softened. The sound faded into small breaths. The room went quiet. Clara felt something inside her tighten and release at the same time. Matthias leaned back in his chair, stunned by how quickly the shift had happened. Naomi swayed slightly, humming under her breath. Elias's eyes closed fully. The interview had just ended, though no one said it aloud. The house, for the first time in weeks, felt still. Naomi remained standing in the center of the dining room, Elias resting peacefully against her shoulder, his small hand curled around the fabric of her dress, grip loose in sleep. Clara watched the rise and fall of his breathing. She memorized it, as if she needed proof that this calm was real. Matthias stood slowly. He stopped himself before finishing the sentence. Naomi smiled politely. Some babies respond to rhythm, she said, and steady pressure. It helps them feel secure. Secure. The word settled into the space between them. Clara felt an unexpected sting behind her eyes. She had held her son for hours without achieving this stillness. Now he slept in the arms of a woman she had just met. But she also felt relief, honest relief. Naomi gently transferred Elias back into Clara's arms. He did not wake. The weight felt different now, softer, manageable. Matthias cleared his throat. When can you start? Clara turned toward him. The decision had arrived faster than she expected. There was no dramatic discussion, no long debate. The evidence had been clear. Naomi answered with quiet professionalism. I'm available Monday. Clara nodded once. Monday works. The agreement was simple. Paperwork could follow. Schedules could be arranged. Boundaries would be defined. But something else had already begun. As Naomi gathered her folder and stepped toward the door, Elias stirred briefly in Clara's arms. A small whimper escaped him. Without thinking, Naomi leaned closer and whispered softly, "It's okay." Elias settled instantly. Clara felt that reaction, like a tremor beneath her ribs. Not anger, not jealousy, something more complex. Recognition. The help they needed had arrived during their weakest moment. And weakness leaves room for influence. The door closed gently behind Naomi. Clara looked down.
Shh, it's all right, my love. Mommy's here rocking you gently.
Clara looked down at her sleeping son. She did not yet know that this calm would come with a cost. Monday arrived quietly. Naomi began at 6 a.m. The house was dim when she stepped inside, greeted by the soft hum of the baby monitor and the distant sound of Elias stirring. Clara handed over the morning routine with detailed instructions. Feeding schedule, nap windows, pediatrician notes. Every line written neatly on a printed sheet. By the third night, the schedule no longer mattered. At 2:08 a.m., the kitchen lights were on again. Naomi stood barefoot on cool tile, gently warming a bottle, while Elias cried from the living room bassinet. Clara had returned to bed an hour earlier, after trying to settle him without success. Matthias had a 7 a.m. call with Munich and needed sleep. Naomi did not complain. She did not check the clock twice. She lifted Elias carefully, pressing him against her shoulder while pacing the length of the hallway. His cries softened into uneven breaths. She whispered steady words, not rehearsed, just instinctive. "I'm here. I've got you." Outside, the Pacific air pressed against the glass doors. Inside, Naomi's steps marked the rhythm of the night. She sat eventually in the nursery chair, rocking slowly, her own eyes heavy. Elias clutched her finger and refused to release it. By 3:14 a.m., he slept. Naomi remained awake for several minutes longer, making sure the calm would hold. Only then did she lean back, closing her eyes briefly while still upright. Upstairs, Clara slept through the silence. Matthias turned once in bed, unaware that someone else had carried the weight of the night. This became routine. The long nights belonged to Naomi, and presence, repeated in darkness, leaves quiet marks. 3 months later, Clara stood in front of the hallway mirror, adjusting the collar of her blazer. The structure of it felt unfamiliar now. Her briefcase rested by the door. Naomi held Elias in the living room, bouncing him lightly while reviewing a list Clara had prepared the night before. Feeding times updated. Emergency contacts double-checked. "You can call me any time," Clara said, walking in with controlled confidence. "If he cries for more than 15 minutes, text me." Naomi nodded. "Of course." Elias reached toward Clara as she leaned down to kiss his forehead. For a second, Clara felt relief. He recognized her scent, her touch. But when she stepped back toward the door, he turned his face into Naomi's shoulder without protest. Clara paused, just a fraction of a second. Matthias stood near the staircase with his car keys. "You'll be great," he told her. She smiled tightly. "I know." The front door closed. The house shifted. Naomi adjusted Elias against her hip and moved toward the kitchen. The morning unfolded with steady repetition. Diaper, change, bottle, soft music playing from a speaker near the counter. By noon, Elias had laughed twice. Naomi captured the second laugh on her phone, intending to send it to Clara later. She hesitated before pressing record, wondering if she should document moments that might belong to someone else. At 3 p.m., Clara texted, "How is he?" Naomi replied with a photo of Elias gripping a wooden rattle. "He's good, ate well, slept 40 minutes. Clara stared at the screen during a meeting downtown. The image comforted her. It also reminded her where she was not. Back in Laguna Beach, Elias began to associate Naomi's voice with comfort, routine, and response. Presence is rarely dramatic. It is consistent. Matthias's travel increased that winter. The expansion into Berlin required frequent flights, and he insisted on managing negotiations personally. His suitcase remained half-packed in the closet, never fully emptied before the next departure. One early morning, Naomi carried Elias into the driveway to wave goodbye. Clara stood beside them, arms folded tightly against the ocean breeze. "Back in 4 days," Matthias said, kissing Clara quickly before brushing Elias's cheek. Elias blinked at him without recognition. The car disappeared down the hill. Inside the house, the rhythm continued. Naomi organized feeding times around naps. She read aloud from board books, even when Elias could not yet understand the words. She sang quietly while folding laundry. One afternoon, Clara called from her office. "Put me on speaker," she requested. Naomi held the phone near Elias, while Clara spoke in an animated tone, trying to capture his attention. "Hi, sweetheart. It's Mommy." Elias stared at the phone, then looked up at Naomi's face instead. Naomi felt a small ache in her chest. She adjusted the phone slightly, giving Clara more space in the sound. Clara continued speaking, hopeful. After a few seconds, Elias reached for the phone and tapped the screen. The call disconnected. Clara stared at her blank display in the conference room. Colleagues waited for her to return to the discussion. That night, Matthias called from Berlin. "Did he smile today?" he asked. "Yes," Naomi answered. "He did." She hesitated before adding, "He's starting to sit up on his own." There was a pause on the line. "I'll see it when I get back," Matthias said firmly. But milestones do not wait for flight schedules. The next morning, Elias balanced upright without support for nearly 10 seconds, while Naomi knelt in front of him, hands ready. She recorded it. Then she stopped the video before he fell, unsure who it truly belonged to. Spring light filtered through the living room windows. The afternoon it happened. Elias was on the rug, surrounded by soft blocks. Naomi sat cross-legged a few feet away, encouraging him to reach forward. Clara had an afternoon hearing in Los Angeles. Matthias was boarding a flight in Frankfurt. "Come here," Naomi said, gently, extending her hands. Elias pushed himself upright. His legs trembled. He took one uncertain step, then another. Naomi's breath caught. He reached her. She steadied him before he tipped forward. For a moment, she simply held him, absorbing what she had just witnessed. His first steps. No audience, no applause. Just her. She grabbed her phone instinctively and recorded him trying again. This time he laughed as he fell against her chest. Later that evening, Clara watched the video on her phone in the back seat of a rideshare. Pride filled her first. Then something else. "You saw it first," she said, quietly, when she got home. Naomi nodded. "Yes." Clara forced a smile. "Thank you for recording it." Days passed. Elias began babbling more clearly, sounds shaped by repetition. One night, as Naomi rocked him in the nursery after another restless stretch, he touched her cheek and formed a soft syllable. "Ma?" She froze. He said it again, softer, testing the sound. "Ma?" Naomi's heart pounded. She did not encourage it. She did not correct it. She simply looked at him. Elias smiled and pressed his forehead lightly against her chin. That sound lingered in the dim room. Pause here. If you were watching this unfold in your own home, what would you believe shapes attachment more deeply? Biology or daily presence? Comment your answer before we continue. Naomi swallowed carefully. She whispered only, "Sleep now." But she knew something had shifted. A word had begun forming long before anyone else heard it. The first clear word did not happen during the day. It happened at night. The house was dark, except for the small lamp in the nursery. Clara had fallen asleep on the sofa downstairs, a legal file open on her lap. Matthias was in London, finalizing a partnership deal. Elias had refused to settle for nearly an hour. Naomi paced the hallway slowly, counting her steps in rhythm with his breathing. When she lowered herself into the rocking chair again, he studied her face with unusual focus. Not crying now, observing. She brushed a curl away from his forehead. "You're okay," she whispered. He reached up and touched her chin. His mouth moved deliberately this time. Clear, intentional, directed. Naomi felt the word land against her chest. She did not react immediately. She did not smile widely or repeat it back. He said it again, "Ma," and this time he was looking straight at her. Her throat tightened. She knew this moment was not hers to own, but it had happened in her arms. She pressed her lips together and gently corrected him. "Naomi," she said softly, tapping her chest. "Naomi." Elias blinked, confused but content. He rested his head against her shoulder and drifted into sleep. Naomi remained awake long after, staring at the wall across from her. She did not record this one. Some moments are too fragile for cameras. Downstairs, Clara stirred on the sofa, but did not wake fully. Across the ocean, Matthias sent a late message. "Landing soon. Miss him." In the quiet nursery, Naomi held the sleeping child carefully. Aware that something invisible had shifted. Attachment does not announce itself loudly. It forms in repetition, and by the time others notice it, it has already taken root. By Elias's second birthday, the house felt organized. Schedules worked. Sleep improved. Clara had resumed full hours at her firm. Matthias's company expanded across 2 continents. Naomi moved through the home with quiet efficiency, anticipating needs before they were spoken. From the outside, it looked stable. Inside, something subtle had shifted. Clara noticed it first, during small moments. Elias tugged at Naomi's sleeve when he wanted juice. He ran past Clara in the hallway to reach the kitchen where Naomi stood. He searched Naomi's face when he scraped his elbow, even if Clara was closer. None of it was dramatic, but repetition builds weight. One Saturday morning, Clara decided she would take Elias to the beach alone. "Just us," she said lightly, while packing sunscreen into a tote bag. Elias stood by the door, holding a small plastic shovel. Naomi crouched to tie his sneakers. "Ready?" Clara asked brightly. Elias looked between them. His hand reached instinctively toward Naomi's fingers before she gently redirected him toward Clara. "It's a mommy day," Naomi said warmly. Clara felt the phrasing settle awkwardly. Mummy day, as if there were other categories. They drove down the Pacific Coast Highway in silence. Clara pointed out waves, seagulls, surfers. Elias listened, but his excitement felt muted. On the sand, he clung to her leg when unfamiliar sounds startled him. Clara tried to interpret that as closeness. Still, when he tripped near the shoreline, he cried a familiar word. "Naomi!" The beach wind swallowed part of it, but Clara heard enough. Back home that evening, Matthias reviewed financial reports in his study, while Clara stood in the doorway. He called her name, Clara said evenly. Matthias looked up. Children repeat what they hear most. That's the point. He leaned back in his chair. Clara, she's with him during the day. That's practical. It doesn't change who you are. But Clara had not questioned her title. She had questioned her place. The arguments did not erupt. They unfolded quietly, in fragments. Clara began coming home earlier than usual, not announcing it, simply arriving before Naomi expected her. She would pause in the hallway, before entering the living room, observing the dynamic from a distance. Elias sat on the rug, leaning comfortably against Naomi's knee while she read aloud. His fingers traced the pictures as she turned each page. When he laughed, he looked up at her face first. Clara stepped forward then, placing her bag on the console table with deliberate sound. "I'm home," she said. Elias glanced toward her and smiled, but did not stand. Naomi closed the book gently. "Mommy's home," she said, encouraging him. Elias rose slowly, toddling over. Clara knelt to hug him, breathing in the scent of sunscreen and soap. She held him a second longer than necessary. Later that night, after Naomi left for the evening, Clara stood in the kitchen with Matthias. "He looks for her," she said quietly. Matthias rinsed a glass at the sink. "She's consistent. That's all." "I'm not." He turned. "That's not what I meant." But the words had already landed. Clara folded her arms. "I carried him. I gave birth to him. I went back to work for us. And now I feel like a visitor." Matthias stepped closer, lowering his voice. "This is temporary. As he grows, it balances." Clara searched his expression. "You're not worried." He hesitated. That hesitation spoke louder than any answer, because he had noticed it too. He simply did not know how to address it without disrupting what was functioning. Stability felt fragile. He chose not to shake it. From the doorway down the hall, Naomi paused before leaving. She had not heard every word, but she sensed enough. The air between husband and wife had grown heavier, and she stood at the center of it, whether she wanted to or not. The tension changed its tone. It stopped being spoken and started being watched. Clara began noticing the smallest exchanges. The way Elias's fingers curled instinctively around Naomi's hand when crossing the driveway. The way he leaned his head against Naomi's shoulder during afternoon cartoons. The way he called out for her from his bedroom after naps. One evening, Clara decided she would handle bedtime alone. "I'll do it," she said, stepping into the nursery before Naomi could begin the routine. Naomi nodded without resistance. Of course, Elias sat in his crib, clutching a small stuffed elephant. Clara lifted him gently, pressing a kiss against his temple. She dimmed the lights, sang the lullaby she had chosen months ago. The one she had sung when he was still inside her. He twisted in her arms. "Restless? It's okay," she whispered. He shook his head lightly and reached toward the door. "Naomi," he called. The name was clear. Expectant, Clara's throat tightened. "Mommy's here," she said again, trying to keep her tone soft. He began to cry, not loudly, not dramatically, just a steady protest that did not fade. In the hallway, Naomi stood frozen. She had heard her name. She did not move at first. She waited, giving Clara space. The crying grew sharper. Matthias stepped out of his study, looking between them. "Maybe she can just help," he suggested carefully. Clara turned toward him with disbelief. "Help?" The word stung. Naomi finally stepped forward, entering the nursery slowly. "I can stand here," she offered quietly. "He just needs to see me." Clara hesitated. Pride and exhaustion wrestled inside her. She stepped aside. Naomi moved closer to the crib and rested her hand lightly on Elias's back. "I'm here," she said softly. His breathing steadied within seconds. Clara watched the shift with a mixture of gratitude and something more painful. Matthias looked down at the floor. He did not intervene. That night, the bedroom door between Clara and Matthias closed more firmly than usual. No raised voices followed, just distance. The shift became visible in quiet spaces. The bedroom door remained closed more often. Not locked, just shut. Clara began waking earlier than everyone else. Sitting at the kitchen island with untouched coffee, she watched Naomi move through the morning routine with practiced rhythm. Shoes tied, lunch packed. Elias lifted into his car seat. "Have a good day," Clara would say, standing near the doorway. Elias waved without looking back. One afternoon, Clara returned home unexpectedly early. A hearing had been postponed. The house was silent, except for soft music drifting from the nursery. She walked down the hallway slowly. The door was slightly open. Inside, Elias sat on the floor, surrounded by wooden blocks. Naomi sat beside him, legs folded, watching as he stacked them unevenly. One tower collapsed. Elias's lip trembled. Naomi leaned closer. "It's okay," she said gently. "I'm here." 3 words. Simple. Clara froze in the hallway. Elias crawled into Naomi's lap without hesitation. She wrapped her arms around him naturally, resting her cheek against his hair. He relaxed immediately. Clara felt a sharp awareness pass through her chest. Not accusation, not proof of anything improper. just clarity. This was the voice he trusted in moments of frustration. This was the body he leaned into when something went wrong. She stepped back before the floor creaked beneath her. She did not enter the room. She did not announce herself. Instead, she walked to the living room and stood near the glass doors overlooking the ocean. Behind her, down the hallway, she heard Naomi's voice.
I think about him every day. I wonder if he's happy.
Heard Naomi's voice again. I'm here. Clara closed her eyes briefly. It was not betrayal. It was displacement, and the space between mother and child felt wider than the hallway itself. The thought arrived quietly. Clara did not announce it. She carried it alone for days before speaking it aloud. It began during a meeting downtown. She stood before a panel of senior partners, outlining a case strategy she had prepared with precision. Her voice was steady, her argument sharp. The room respected her. Her phone vibrated once on the table beside her folder. She ignored it. After the meeting ended, she stepped into the hallway and checked the screen. A photo from Naomi. Elias sat at the kitchen table in Laguna Beach, flour on his hands, smiling broadly at something just outside the frame. Clara stared at the image longer than she intended. She zoomed in on his expression. The joy was real, unfiltered. She saved the photo to her favorites. That night, she stood at the balcony, overlooking the ocean. Matthias joined her after finishing a late call. I've been thinking, she began. He recognized the tone immediately. It meant something significant. I could step back, she said. Resign? Or take a long leave? Be home? The words surprised even her once spoken. Matthias turned fully toward her. Clara, your firm will replace me if I leave, she said calmly. I know that. That's not what I meant. She faced him. Then what do you mean? He hesitated. You worked hard to build that career. I worked hard to build this family too. Silence lingered between them. Clara's eyes did not break from his. I don't want to feel like a visitor anymore. Matthias looked down toward the dark shoreline below. The thought of Clara giving up her ambition unsettled him, not because he doubted her love for Elias, because he feared what resentment might grow later. You don't have to sacrifice everything, he said carefully. Maybe I already have, she replied. The ocean continued its steady rhythm below. Inside, a larger decision had begun forming. Matthias did not sleep well that night. At 5:30 a.m., he stood alone in his home office, staring at the framed photographs on his desk. Elias's first birthday, family trip to Napa, Clara laughing with wind in her hair. His laptop screen glowed with unread emails from Berlin, Zurich, New York, growth charts, expansion forecasts, numbers that required attention. He closed the screen. For the first time in years, he asked himself a question he had avoided. If presence builds attachment, where has he been? Later that morning, he walked into the kitchen as Naomi prepared breakfast for Elias. Clara sat at the table, reviewing documents, but her focus drifted toward the two of them repeatedly. Elias laughed as Naomi wiped oatmeal from his chin. The ease between them was visible, not dramatic. Natural. Matthias pulled out a chair and sat down. "We need to talk tonight," he said quietly to Clara. She met his eyes and nodded once. The evening arrived with unusual stillness. Naomi finished her shift and lingered near the doorway, sensing something unspoken. "Can we all sit together?" Matthias asked. Clara stiffened slightly. "Or?" "Yes." Naomi hesitated. "If this is about me, it concerns all of us," Matthias replied. They gathered at the dining table. Elias colored with crayons nearby, unaware of the weight settling in the room. Clara folded her hands tightly. "I was considering leaving my firm," she began. Naomi looked up immediately. "Because of me?" "No," Clara said, perhaps too quickly. "Because of him." Matthias leaned forward. "This is not about blame." But the tension suggested otherwise. Naomi swallowed. "If my presence is creating an imbalance, I can step away." The offer hung heavily between them. Clara blinked in surprise. "You would resign?" "If it helps restore what you feel is missing," Naomi answered. Matthias looked from one woman to the other. The solution seemed simple on paper. Remove the variable. But families are not equations, and removing stability carries its own cost. The room waited for his response. Matthias did not answer immediately. He looked toward Elias, who sat on the floor, stacking blocks beside the dining table. Each time a piece slipped, he glanced instinctively toward Naomi. Not Clara, not him. The pattern was clear. "This isn't about replacing anyone," Matthias said finally. "It's about what we've allowed to happen." Clara inhaled slowly. "Allowed?" "I've been absent," he admitted. "Not just physically, mentally. I've prioritized growth everywhere, except here." The honesty startled the room. Naomi lowered her eyes. Clara studied her husband carefully, measuring whether this was temporary guilt or real recognition. "I don't want you to leave your career," Matthias continued, turning toward Clara. "I don't want Naomi to resign." Naomi looked up again. "So what do you want?" Clara asked. Matthias exhaled. "I want to step back." The words settled differently than Clara's had. "My company will survive a few months without daily oversight," he said. "I built leadership teams for that reason. I'll take extended leave, work remotely, be here." Clara's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "You?" "Yes." Naomi remained silent. Matthias looked directly at her. "Your consistency has built trust with him. Removing that suddenly would hurt him. But I can increase my presence without disrupting what's stable." He turned back to Clara. "Let me try first." The decision was not impulsive. It was deliberate, calculated, for once, directed inward rather than outward. He reached for his phone, opened his calendar, and began clearing international travel for the next quarter. Meetings disappeared from the screen, one by one. The air in the room shifted. Hope entered quietly. Matthias closed his phone and looked at Clara. "I'll fix what I've neglected." Pause here. If you were in his position, what would you sacrifice to rebuild connection with your child? Career, momentum, income, reputation? Share your answer before we continue. Naomi watched the exchange with cautious relief. Clara leaned back slowly in her chair. For the first time in months, the responsibility did not rest entirely on her shoulders. A reset had begun, but resets require more than intention. The following Monday, Matthias did not leave for the airport. Instead, he walked into his home office and removed the framed flight schedule pinned to the corkboard. He placed it in a drawer and closed it carefully. His assistant's voice came through the speakerphone at 9 a.m. sharp. "Are you certain about this, sir?" "Yes," he replied calmly. "Reassign the Berlin meetings. Push Zurich to next quarter. I'll handle strategy remotely." He ended the call and stared at the empty calendar grid on his screen. For the first time in years, large sections of his day belonged to nothing. Downstairs, Naomi prepared Elias's snack as usual. Clara stood near the staircase, watching Matthias descend at an hour he was normally gone. "You're still here," she said quietly. "I am." He removed his watch and placed it on the console table. A small gesture, but symbolic. That afternoon, he insisted on taking Elias to the park alone. Naomi offered guidance about his favorite swing and preferred snacks. Matthias listened carefully, not defensively. At the park, Elias clung to him at first, uncertain. Matthias crouched to eye level and waited. He did not rush the interaction. He did not check his phone. "Let's try," he said gently. They walked slowly across the grass. Each step felt unfamiliar, but intentional. Back home, Clara stood at the kitchen counter, reviewing emails while glancing toward the window. She watched father and son return together, Elias holding Matthias's hand. Naomi observed quietly from the hallway. Her role had shifted subtly, not removed. Adjusted. That evening, they gathered at the dinner table again. No confrontation this time, just shared space. Matthias asked Elias about his blocks. Clara laughed at something small and unimportant. Naomi listened more than she spoke. Hope felt present, but it was fragile, because attachment does not reverse overnight, and patterns built through repetition do not disappear simply because someone chooses to stay home. The reset had begun. The outcome remained uncertain. For 2 weeks, Matthias committed fully. He handled breakfast. He read afternoon stories. He sat cross-legged on the nursery floor during playtime, ignoring the quiet vibration of emails he had muted but not silenced completely. Clara watched carefully. She did not interfere. She allowed space for the adjustment. Naomi stepped back where she could. She waited longer before responding when Elias called. She encouraged him gently toward his father. "Daddy's here," she would say, guiding his attention. The first few days felt promising. Elias accepted Matthias's presence without resistance. He laughed during tickle games. He reached for him occasionally when climbing the couch. Clara allowed herself cautious relief. But habits reveal themselves during stress. One evening, Elias tripped near the dining table and hit his knee against the corner. The cry came sharp and immediate. Matthias was closest. He bent down instantly. "It's okay," he said, lifting him. Elias's tears did not slow. Naomi stepped forward instinctively from the kitchen doorway. She paused, giving space. "Daddy's here," Matthias repeated. Elias twisted in his arms, looking over his shoulder. His eyes searched. "Naomi," he cried. The room fell still. Clara felt the moment land before she saw Matthias's expression shift. Naomi approached slowly this time, careful not to move too fast. "I'm here," she said softly, kneeling beside them rather than taking Elias immediately. Elias leaned toward her anyway. Matthias held him tighter for half a second, as if resisting the pattern. Then he loosened his grip. Naomi placed a gentle hand on Elias's back, while Matthias continued holding him. It was not rejection. It was instinct. Clara stood near the...
"Look at me."
Clara stood near the staircase, watching the exchange unfold exactly as before. The reset had begun, but the attachment had not shifted. Hope flickered. Doubt followed close behind. Matthias treated bonding like a project. He researched toddler routines the way he once studied market expansions. Articles open on his tablet. Notes written in the margin of a legal pad. Structured time blocks on his calendar, labeled simply Elias. At 7 a.m., he prepared breakfast himself. Oatmeal measured carefully, fruit sliced unevenly, but with effort. Elias watched from his high chair, unsure why the rhythm felt different. "Daddy's cooking today," Matthias said, with deliberate cheer. Elias looked toward the hallway, automatically, expecting Naomi's familiar footsteps. She did not appear. From the kitchen doorway, Naomi observed quietly. Clara had asked her to begin stepping back from certain routines, not withdrawing, adjusting. Matthias carried Elias to the backyard later that morning. The California sun warmed the grass. He set up a small plastic soccer goal and kicked the ball gently toward his son. "Your turn," he encouraged. Elias hesitated before nudging the ball forward. He glanced toward the house again. Matthias felt it every time. That search, that comparison. He knelt lower, bringing himself eye level. "Look at me," he said softly. "I'm here." The phrase sounded unfamiliar in his own mouth. Elias studied him carefully, as if learning a new face. Later, they walked to the park at the end of the street. Matthias pushed the stroller while resisting the urge to check his phone. On the swings, Elias laughed for the first time that day without looking elsewhere. It was small, but real. When they returned home, Matthias felt something close to relief. Progress measured in seconds rather than milestones. Inside the house, Naomi folded laundry in silence. She knew this phase was necessary, but stepping back requires intention too, and intention can feel like distance. Clara noticed the change before she acknowledged it aloud. The house felt louder in the afternoons now. Matthias's voice carried from the living room. He attempted silly accents while reading picture books. He built uneven block towers that collapsed dramatically on purpose. Elias began laughing more freely around him. One evening, Clara arrived home to find father and son sitting cross-legged on the floor, crayons scattered between them. Matthias held up a drawing with exaggerated pride. "Look what we made," he said. Elias clapped once. Clara stood still in the doorway for a moment, taking in the scene. She felt something loosen inside her chest. Not jealousy this time, not fear, relief. At dinner, Matthias described their afternoon with careful enthusiasm. Clara listened, asking small questions that felt genuine. Naomi served plates quietly and returned to her seat without inserting herself. Later that night, Clara approached Naomi in the kitchen. "I see you giving space," Clara said softly. Naomi nodded. "It's important." Clara hesitated before adding, "Thank you." The word carried weight. For the first time, the tension between them softened into understanding rather than competition. Upstairs, Elias called out once from his room. Matthias responded immediately. Clara listened from the hallway, waiting to hear whether he would settle. His voice came steady through the door. "I've got you." The crying slowed. Clara exhaled slowly. The shift was not complete, but it had begun to move, and for the first time in months, hope did not feel fragile. It felt possible. Naomi adjusted her routines carefully. She arrived at the same hour. She left at the same hour, but in between, she paused before stepping in. She waited to see whether Matthias or Clara would respond first. Some days they did. Other days, old habits resurfaced. One afternoon, Elias struggled to fit a puzzle piece into place. He tried twice, failed. His frustration rose quickly. Naomi instinctively moved toward him. She stopped herself mid-step. "Daddy can help," she said gently instead. Elias frowned, confused by the redirect. He looked between them, unsure which response would bring faster comfort. Matthias crouched beside him. "Let's figure it out together." The first attempt failed. The second attempt failed. Elias's lower lip trembled. Naomi stood at the kitchen counter, hands resting flat against the surface, resisting the urge to intervene. Matthias slowed his tone. "It's okay to try again." After a few minutes, the piece fit. Elias smiled briefly, but the smile lacked the immediate spark Naomi was used to seeing. That evening, as Naomi prepared to leave, She folded a small overnight bag near the entryway. Not to move out, simply to spend the weekend visiting her sister in Long Beach. Elias noticed the bag. "Where to go?" he asked. "I'm visiting family," she replied softly. He stepped closer, touching the strap. His expression shifted from curiosity to worry. "You come back?" "Yes." "When?" "When?" "Sunday night." He processed this slowly. "Naomi, go?" he asked again, seeking confirmation. Matthias stepped forward. "She'll be back soon." Elias looked between them, unsettled by the change. Adjustment carries confusion, and confusion can surface questions no one expected. Naomi did not sleep much the night she returned from Long Beach. The weekend had given her space to think, space away from the rhythms of the Laguna Beach house, away from Elias's laughter and questions, away from the subtle tension she felt, even when no one spoke it. On Monday morning, she arrived earlier than usual. The sky was pale, the ocean barely visible through morning mist. She placed her bag on the kitchen counter and removed a folded sheet of paper from inside. It had taken her nearly an hour to write it the night before. Simple, direct, a resignation letter. No blame, no explanation. Beyond gratitude and timing, she smoothed the paper once with her palm, then slid it into a plain envelope. She wrote Clara and Matthias's names carefully across the front. The house was quiet. Clara had already left for an early meeting. Matthias was upstairs helping Elias dress. Naomi stood still in the center of the kitchen, the envelope resting against the cool granite surface. She did not want to leave, but she also did not want to remain the unspoken divide between two parents. Footsteps approached from the hallway. Naomi turned instinctively, sliding the envelope slightly closer to the fruit bowl, unsure whether to hide it or present it. Matthias entered first. Elias perched on his hip. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied evenly. Elias reached for her immediately. Naomi took him gently, inhaling the familiar scent of baby soap and sunscreen. For a brief second, the letter on the counter felt impossible. Clara returned home unexpectedly before noon. A hearing had ended sooner than planned. She stepped into the kitchen, removing her heels and placing them neatly by the door. Her eyes landed on the envelope. She recognized her name in Naomi's handwriting. Clara picked it up slowly. Naomi felt her breath catch. The quiet decision she had prepared to deliver later had arrived sooner than she intended. Clara did not open the envelope immediately. She held it between her fingers, as if weighing it. The paper felt heavier than it should have. "This what I think it is?" she asked calmly. Naomi met her gaze. There was no anger in Clara's voice. That made it harder. "Yes?" Matthias looked between them, confusion settling across his face. "What's going on?" Clara placed the envelope on the kitchen counter, but did not release it completely. "She's resigning." Elias sat on the floor nearby, unaware, pushing a toy truck back and forth along the tile. Matthias stepped closer. "Why?" Naomi swallowed. Because I don't want to be the reason there's tension in this house. Clara's expression shifted. Not defensive. Not offended. Just tired. You think this is about you? Clara asked quietly. It isn't, Naomi replied. Clara looked at the envelope again. You didn't create what was already there. Naomi lowered her eyes. But I've been standing in the middle of it. Matthias ran a hand through his hair. We agreed on an adjustment, not departure. Naomi nodded. Adjustment hasn't erased the imbalance. He still reaches for me first when he's hurt. And that isn't fair to you. She looked directly at Debolo. You're his mother. The words carried no competition, only acknowledgement. Clara's grip on the envelope loosened. And you think leaving fixes that? Naomi hesitated. It might force a reset. Silence lingered between the two women. Clara saw something new in Naomi's expression. Not attachment, not control. Concern. The conflict had shifted. This was no longer a rivalry. It was responsibility. Clara picked up the envelope again and walked toward the dining table. Sit, she said gently. Naomi obeyed without hesitation. Matthias remained standing near the kitchen island, uncertain whether to stay or give space. This is between us, Clara added quietly. Matthias nodded once and stepped into the living room, within sight but out of earshot. Clara placed the envelope flat on the table. She did not open it. When you arrived, she began, I was exhausted. I felt like I was failing at something I was supposed to do naturally. Naomi listened without interruption. You didn't replace me, Clara continued. You stepped in when I couldn't hold everything together. Naomi's voice softened. I never wanted to take your place. I know. The admission surprised them both. Clara leaned back in her chair. I felt displaced. Not because of you. Because I wasn't present the way I wanted to be. Naomi looked down at her hands. He needed someone consistent. And you were, Clara said. That doesn't make you the problem. Naomi hesitated. But don't want him confused. Clara allowed a small, weary smile. He's a child. Confusion is part of growth. Tears filled Naomi's eyes unexpectedly. She blinked them back quickly. If I stay, I need clear boundaries. Not silence. Not tension. Clara nodded, slowly. Agreed. The envelope remained unopened between them. The resignation had shifted from exit to negotiation. Not about employment. About identity. Clara reached across the table and placed her hand flat over the envelope. Then, slowly, she slid it back toward Naomi. I don't want you to leave, she said. Naomi looked up, searching her face for hesitation. There was none, only resolve. But things must change, Clara continued. Not in fear. In clarity. Naomi nodded once. Tell me how. Clara chose her words carefully. When he's hurt, give us a moment first, even if it feels uncomfortable. Let him see that we respond to. I already try, Naomi said softly. I know, Clara replied. Keep trying. And if I step back into old habits, remind me. Not silently. Directly, the request startled Naomi. You want me to correct you? I want honesty, Clara answered. Matthias returned quietly, sensing the shift. He looked at the envelope, still resting between them. So, he asked. She's staying, Clara said. Relief crossed his face before he could mask it. Naomi exhaled slowly, as if releasing something she had been holding for months. Elias wandered into the kitchen then, clutching his stuffed elephant. He looked between the three adults gathered around the table. Naomi stay? He asked. Clara rose and knelt beside him. Yes, she stays. Elias smiled and ran forward, wrapping his arms around Naomi's waist. Naomi looked down at him, then up at Clara. Clara gave a small nod. Not surrender, not defeat, an agreement. The conflict had shifted from silent competition to shared responsibility. The envelope remained unopened, a symbol of what could have ended, what had just been redefined. The reset became intentional, not emotional, not reactive, structured. Clara blocked 2 evenings a week on her calendar, labeled simply home early. She left her office before sunset, even when emails waited. The drive along the Pacific Coast Highway became a ritual of transition rather than stress. Matthias remained consistent. Breakfast every morning, park every Wednesday, story time every night. Naomi adjusted without withdrawing. She prepared meals, handled logistics, and stepped in only when invited. The first structured bonding night felt awkward. Clara sat on the living room rug with a box of building blocks. Elias stood across from her, uncertain why Naomi was seated on the couch instead of beside him. Just us, Clara said gently. He hesitated, then crossed the rug slowly. They built uneven towers together. Clara laughed when hers collapsed. Elias watched her reaction carefully, as if measuring whether it was safe to mirror it. He smiled. Across the room, Naomi folded laundry quietly, resisting the urge to guide the interaction. Matthias observed from the kitchen, arms crossed, protective but silent. Later that night, Clara handled bedtime alone again. This time, when Elias shifted restlessly, she did not call for help. She remained seated beside the crib, humming softly until his breathing steadied. It took longer, but it worked. The next morning, Elias ran into the kitchen shouting, "Mummy!" Clara froze for half a second. The word felt different this time. Not confused, directed. Naomi smiled from the sink. Progress was slow, but visible. The invitation arrived, folded inside a small blue envelope from preschool. Bring performance. Parents invited. Clara read the notice twice at the kitchen counter. It's next Friday, she said, holding the paper carefully as if it were fragile. Elias bounced beside her. unaware of the weight it carried. Matthias leaned over her shoulder. Will both be there? Naomi stood at the sink, listening. She did not assume her place in this one. The days leading up to the performance shifted the household rhythm again. Elias practiced a short song in the living room, swaying slightly as he memorized the movements. Clara sat cross-legged on the floor, clapping softly in encouragement. Matthias filmed one rehearsal, but kept the phone low, present rather than distracted. Naomi helped Elias choose his outfit for the stage. A light blue shirt, khaki shorts. She ironed it carefully, then placed it on the bed for Clara to approve. On the morning of the performance, Clara dressed him herself. She buttoned each button slowly, smoothing the fabric as if anchoring the moment. At the school auditorium, rows of folding chairs faced a small wooden stage. Parents filled the room with quiet chatter. Clara chose seats in the front row. Naomi entered a few minutes later and selected a seat near the back, partially hidden behind another parent. Matthias noticed, but said nothing. Elias peeked from behind the curtain, scanning the crowd nervously. His eyes landed first on Clara. She lifted her hand in a small wave. He smiled. The music began. Clara leaned forward, fully present. Matthias sat steady beside her. Balance had begun to form. But attachment habits do not disappear simply because effort increases. They adjust slowly, and moments like this test whether the shift holds under attention. The children stepped onto the stage in uneven lines. Elias stood near the center, fingers fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. The bright lights made him squint. Clara leaned forward in her seat, hands clasped tightly together. Matthias rested his arm along the back of her chair, steady but silent. From the rear row, Naomi watched without drawing attention to herself. The music began. Elias swayed slightly out of sync at first. He searched the crowd instinctively. His eyes moved past unfamiliar faces until they landed on Clara again. She smiled and mouthed the words of the song. He relaxed. Midway through the performance, he missed a cue and froze for a second. The audience rustled softly. Clara resisted the urge to stand. She stayed seated, nodding gently, as if reminding him she was there. He found his place again. Near the final verse, Elias scanned the room once more. His eyes flicked toward the back. Naomi gave him a small thumbs up from her seat, subtle but reassuring. He smiled at both women. Pause here. Once family roles shift, do you believe they can truly be rebuilt, or do they simply evolve into something new? Share your thoughts before we return to the present moment. The song ended in scattered applause. Clara stood first, clapping with pride that felt earned rather than uncertain. Matthias followed. Naomi remained seated a moment longer, letting the parents in the front row rise ahead of her. The structure had changed, not by removal, by definition, and the next moment would reveal how deeply that definition had taken root. After the performance, parents gathered near the stage for photographs. Clara moved forward first. She knelt as Elias ran into her arms, lifting him briefly, despite his growing weight. "You did so well," she whispered. Matthias joined them, placing a steady hand on Elias's shoulder. "Proud of you," he said. Elias beamed, cheeks flushed from stage lights and applause. Naomi approached more slowly, remaining a few steps back. She did not insert herself into the center of the frame. She waited. Elias noticed her and tugged gently at Clara's sleeve. "Naomi, watch?" he asked. "Yes," Clara answered, without hesitation. She watched. Elias smiled and waved toward the back row where Naomi had sat. Naomi returned the wave, staying where she was. Until Clara stepped aside slightly and motioned her closer. The gesture was deliberate, not surrender, inclusion. They took a photo together, Clara kneeling, Matthias standing tall behind them, Elias in the middle, Naomi slightly to the side, but within the frame. Later that afternoon, back home in Laguna Beach, Elias practiced the song again in the living room. This time, he sang directly toward Clara, without prompting. Naomi cleaned up art supplies, quietly in the kitchen. Matthias stood by the window, watching the interaction with measured relief. Progress felt steady, not dramatic. Just steady, but even steady ground can reveal where roots have already grown deepest, and the present moment they had tried to reshape still waited ahead. The living room returned to silence. The word still lingered in the air. "Mom." Elias's small body had reached forward without hesitation. Naomi's arms had caught him automatically. Clara had frozen. Matthias had watched. Now, the moment replayed in Clara's mind with sharper detail. The way Elias's fingers stretched. The way his voice carried certainty. The way Naomi's face shifted from instinct to restraint in half a second. Clara stood near the dining chair again, her hand still resting where she had gripped it earlier. She forced her expression steady. No raised voice, no visible fracture. "I'm right here," she had said. But the first reach had not been toward her. Elias sniffled softly against Naomi's shoulder. Naomi lowered him carefully, letting him stand between them. She did not overstep. She did not claim the space. Matthias stepped forward then, but too late to redirect what had already happened. Clara felt exposed, not publicly, privately. 6 years of adjustment, conversations, structured effort, presence reclaimed piece by piece. And still, in the moment of instinct, Elias had turned elsewhere. Naomi stepped back first, a deliberate retreat. "I'll get ice for his knee," she said quietly, giving space. Clara nodded once. The room felt smaller now than it had at the beginning. Matthias watched his wife carefully. He knew her strength. He also knew the cost of silence. Elias wiped his eyes and wandered toward his toys again, the crisis forgotten as quickly as it began. For him, it was comfort. For the adults, it was a revelation. Clara did not stay in the room. She walked toward the glass doors and stepped onto the evening porch overlooking the ocean. The air had cooled. Streetlights flickered along the quiet California street below. She rested her hands against the railing and stared outward without seeing the view. Inside, the sound of Elias's toy truck rolling across the floor carried faintly through the glass. Matthias followed a few seconds later. He closed the door gently behind him. "Clara," he said carefully. She did not turn immediately. "I heard it clearly," she replied. "So did I." The honesty hung between them. She exhaled slowly. "We worked for this. We changed routines. You stepped back. I showed up." Naomi gave space. "Yes," and still her voice tightened slightly. In the moments that mattered most, he reached for her. Matthias stepped closer, but did not touch her yet. Instinct doesn't erase effort. It reveals it, she said. He paused. "What are you afraid of?" Clara turned then, finally meeting his eyes. "That I will always be second in my own home." The words came out steadier than she felt. "I don't want to compete with the woman who helped raise my child," she continued. "But I don't want to feel invisible either." The confession settled heavily. Matthias swallowed. "You are not invisible." He didn't look at me first. Silence followed. Not defensive, reflective. Inside, Elias's voice called faintly, laughing at something small and ordinary. The ordinary continued, but something deeper had surfaced. Clara looked toward the darkening horizon. "I don't want to resent her," she said quietly. Matthias understood the weight of that sentence. Resentment grows quietly when left unspoken. And tonight, nothing remained unspoken anymore. The porch light cast a soft glow against the railing. Clara leaned back slightly, folding her arms across her chest, as if bracing herself. "I thought I had reclaimed it," she said. "His trust, his instinct." "You have," Matthias replied gently. Shook her head. "Instinct is immediate. It doesn't calculate. It doesn't evaluate progress. It just moves." Matthias considered that. She was right. Instinct bypasses intention. Inside the house, Naomi moved quietly through the kitchen. She had heard the glass door close. She had seen Clara step outside. She understood what that meant. Elias ran toward the hallway, then stopped, scanning the space. "Mommy," he called. Clara's shoulders stiffened at the sound through the glass. She inhaled sharply. "Now he calls for me." Matthias stepped closer. "Because he knows you're there." She looked at him carefully. "Do you believe that?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. Clara stared back toward the living room. Naomi knelt beside Elias, guiding him gently toward the porch doors. "Mommy's outside," Naomi said softly. Clara noticed the phrasing. Not "I'm here," not "come to me." Mommy's outside. Something shifted slightly in her chest. The fear did not disappear, but it adjusted The door opened quietly behind them. Naomi stepped onto the porch, but remained near the threshold. "I think he's looking for you," she said. Clara turned fully then. The tension between them is no longer hidden. For a second, neither woman spoke. Then Naomi stepped closer. "He knows who his mother is," she said calmly. The words carried no defense, no competition, only certainty. Clara searched her face, looking for hesitation. There was none. Inside, Elias called again, "Mummy." The choice now rested with Clara. Return to the living room with renewed trust, or remain outside with doubt. The porch light flickered once as night settled deeper across Laguna Beach. The moment waited. Clara stepped back inside. Elias ran toward her without hesitation this time, arms lifted high. "Mommy," she knelt quickly, bringing herself to his eye level before he reached her. Her hands rested on his shoulders, steady, present. "I'm here," she said softly. He touched her face, as if confirming something. Then he leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers. The simplicity of the gesture quieted everything else. Naomi remained a few steps behind them, watching without inserting herself. Matthias stood near the hallway, observing closely. Elias pulled back slightly and looked between the two women. "Mommy?" he repeated, pointing at Clara. Then he turned toward Naomi. "Naomi, clear. Separate." Certain, Clara felt something settle into place inside her chest. Not victory, not relief alone. Recognition. He understood the difference. Children do not confuse love when it is defined clearly around them. Clara wrapped her arms around Elias and held him firmly. This time, the embrace did not feel contested. Naomi smiled softly. "He just needed to see you first," she said gently. Clara looked up at her. "He needed you to remind him." The tension that had once lived between them no longer felt sharp. It felt acknowledged. Matthias stepped forward and crouched beside them. "Looks like we're all learning," he said quietly. Elias laughed at the closeness and squeezed both adults at once, small arms stretching wide. The moment did not erase the past. It clarified it. The shift did not end with one embrace. It continued in language. The next morning, when Elias stumbled over his shoes in the hallway, Naomi knelt first, but paused deliberately. "Mommy's right there," she said, guiding his attention before touching him. Clara stepped forward instinctively and scooped him up. "I've got you." Elias relaxed immediately. Naomi smiled, but her smile carried intention. She began adjusting small phrases throughout the day. Instead of "come to me," she said, "let's show Mommy." Instead of "I'm here," she added, "Daddy's here, too." The language reshaped instinct gradually. Matthias noticed it. One afternoon, he found Naomi in the kitchen, rinsing dishes. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" For helping him understand, without stepping away. Naomi dried her hands slowly. "He doesn't need one person less. He needs clarity. Matthias nodded. That evening, he sat alone in his office, with the door open for the first time in weeks. His calendar remained lighter than before. He stared at an old photograph of Elias's first birthday. He had been present physically that day, but his phone had been in his hand more often than not. Presence is not proximity. He had learned that too late. Clara entered quietly and leaned against the doorway. "You did step back," she said. "I should have stepped in earlier," he replied. She walked closer and rested a hand on his shoulder. We both adjusted. "She helped," he added. Clara nodded. Yes, the family structure had not removed anyone. It had clarified roles. Motherhood was not threatened by support. Fatherhood required participation, not authority. And support did not mean replacement. Elias ran past the office laughing, chasing a toy car. Clara and Matthias followed him into the living room together, not as competitors, as parents. A week later, Clara rearranged the family photo wall in the hallway. She removed one frame and replaced it with a new picture from the preschool performance. Elias in the center, Clara kneeling at his side, Matthias standing behind them, Naomi slightly to the right, visible but not dominant. She stepped back to study it. The image felt honest. Naomi approached quietly. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's accurate," Clara replied. Elias ran down the hallway and stopped in front of the photos. He pointed at the newest one. "Mommy," he said, touching Clara's image first. Then he tapped Naomi's. Naomi, clear, confident. Clara knelt beside him. "Who's this?" she asked, pointing to Matthias. "Daddy." He looked at all three adults, satisfied with the labels he had placed. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elias tripped lightly near the couch. The fall was small, the reaction automatic. He looked up. "Mom," he said. This time, his eyes found Clara first. She was already moving. She knelt quickly and opened her arms. He stepped into them without hesitation. Over her shoulder, he smiled at Naomi. Not searching, not uncertain, simply smiling. Naomi returned it warmly. Matthias stood beside them, watching the exchange settle into something steady. Clara held Elias close and whispered, "I'm here." The phrase feels grounded now, not contested, just true. If this story reminded you that presence shapes love more than titles do, stay connected for more stories about family, growth, and second chances. Share what this moment taught you about balance and belonging. Elias squeezed her neck once more before wriggling free to play again. Clara rose slowly. Naomi stepped back into the rhythm of the evening. Matthias wrapped an arm loosely around his wife's shoulders. Outside, the California sky deepened into night. Inside, the house felt balanced. Not perfect, defined.